Everyone thought the boy was just shy, until he gave a barely visible signal to a therapy dog, and the dog's reaction revealed a truth the court had completely missed. You could sit in a room with Javon Merrick for hours and still not know if he liked you. Not because he was rude, he just didn't talk. 12 years old, skinny, dark-skinned, always pulling at the sleeves of his hoodie, like they were hiding him from the world. When he walked into the courtroom in Toledo, Ohio that morning, he barely made eye contact with anyone. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink much. The court officer tried to give him a soft pat on the back as he guided him to the table, but Javon didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't lean in, just sat. Across the room, his foster parents sat stiff in their chairs, Gerald and Lynette Bosley, late 40s, from the outside, the perfect couple. Churchgoers, owned a daycare, no criminal history. On paper, they looked ideal. But today wasn't about what was on paper. Today was about what couldn't be written down. The courtroom had a chill that didn't come from the air conditioning. The kind of chill you get when nobody's sure if they're the good guy or the villain. Javon was the only child of Marquita Merrick, a woman who died during a failed surgical procedure 2 years earlier. No father listed on his birth certificate. Since then, he'd been passed around. 3 homes in 14 months. The Bosleys were his latest placement, and something about them didn't sit right with his school counselor. There hadn't been bruises, no hospital visits, but there were notes. Teachers saying Javon flinched when spoken to, barely ate at lunch, stared out the window too long. Nothing that screamed danger, just odd patterns. Still, CPS didn't have enough to remove him. Until now. Judge Russell Cranmore watched the boy like a man trying to see through a fogged-up window. He was in his 60s, known for his impatience with grandstanding lawyers and courtroom theatrics. But Javon wasn't putting on a show. He was sitting next to his court-appointed guardian, eyes locked on his own fingers. The prosecutor leaned in. "Javon, do you remember what happened last month at home? You can tell us anything you want." No response, not even a headshake. "Do you feel safe with the Bosleys?" Still nothing. "Javon, he's not ignoring you," said the guardian softly. "He just doesn't speak unless he has to." Judge Cranmore rubbed his forehead. "Doesn't speak or won't? He speaks, sometimes, but he's shut down lately." The judge sighed. "We're not going to get far like this." That's when someone opened the side door, and a woman with a beige vest entered, holding a leash. A large golden retriever padded beside her. Calm, ears perked, tail swaying gently. "This is Oscar," the handler said. "We thought he might help ease Javon's anxiety. He's a licensed therapy animal." No objections, just quiet agreement. The woman led Oscar to Javon's table, clipped his leash to a small loop by her belt, and sat down a few feet away. Oscar did what he was trained to do, lay calmly, breathing in the room. Javon didn't smile, but he did move. Barely. His left pinky flicked once, then again. Then, with the most subtle gesture, he twitched his wrist and tapped his thumb twice against his thigh. Oscar's head popped up. His ears perked in a different way. His gaze locked on the boy. And for the first time that morning, Javon's eyes moved. Not to the judge, not to the lawyers, just to the dog. Judge Cranmore caught it. So did the prosecutor. "What was that?" the judge asked. The handler looked confused. "What was what?" "Did the boy signal him?" The handler looked at Javon, then the dog. Oscar was sitting upright now, tail flat, chest still, like he was waiting. She hesitated. "That wasn't one of our standard signals, but he did respond." But something in the dog's posture told the room this wasn't going to be just another silence. Oscar didn't bark, didn't growl, but he didn't relax either. He stayed upright, focused, like he'd just been told something only he could hear. Javon didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his seat or glance around for attention. It wasn't some cry for help performed on cue. He just kept his eyes on the dog, hands folded neatly in his lap. Calm. Too calm for a kid in a courtroom. The handler tilted her head slightly, watching Oscar's behavior with growing concern. He's alerting, she muttered, almost to herself. Alerting to what? The judge asked. I don't know yet, she replied, stepping a little closer to the boy and the dog. Oscar inched forward, slowly, like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed. His nose brushed against Javon's knee. The boy didn't move, but his thumb tapped again. A second time, then a pause, then one final tap. Oscar laid down flat on the floor, but not in a relaxed way. He stayed stiff, eyes open, pressed up tight against the boy's leg. The room had gone quiet. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? The handler exhaled. Oscar's trained to detect signs of trauma. He was originally used with veterans. Those taps, the ones the boy made, those weren't random. That's not fidgeting. It's a learned signal. You mean the boy trained him? The prosecutor asked. I don't know, she said carefully. But Oscar's responding like he recognizes it, and dogs don't fake this kind of response. Javon still hadn't said a word, but the courtroom was hanging on everything he wasn't saying. Gerald Bosley shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. Lynette glanced at him, her face tight. No one else was watching them. All eyes were on the boy and the dog. The judge leaned forward. Javon, where did you learn that signal? The boy's lips parted just slightly. My grandfather, he whispered, the words barely there. The judge raised a hand. Could you say that again? Javon repeated, a bit louder this time. My grandfather taught me. The guardian beside him leaned closer. When did he teach you that? Before he died. When I stayed with him. You trained dogs with him? The handler asked gently. Javon nodded. And what does that signal mean? The one you just gave Oscar? He looked at the dog. That I need help. But I can't say why. Nobody spoke for a beat. Then Oscar stood up again. And this time, he walked across the courtroom, toward Gerald Bosley. Slow, cautious. Lynette reached to pull her husband's arm, but Gerald was frozen. Oscar stopped a foot away. He growled. Low, constant, focused. The handler's mouth dropped slightly open. He's reacting to something specific. Gerald raised both palms. This is ridiculous. That dog's just agitated. He's never done that before, the handler cut in. Ever. He only growls when he feels something is off. That's a trained alert. I've worked with him 3 years. Judge Cranmore narrowed his eyes. Mr. Bosley, have you ever had an encounter with this dog before? Of course not. Javon, the prosecutor said carefully. Why do you think Oscar's reacting to him? The boy didn't answer, but his hands moved again. Subtle finger motions. Different this time. The handler crouched beside the dog. He's giving him another signal, she whispered. He's testing if Oscar remembers the full sequence. Sequence? The judge asked. He's trained. This isn't a fluke. This kid's not just calling for help. He's using operational commands, something that takes months to teach. And Oscar's responding. Oscar stepped forward again. And this time, Gerald stood up. I'm not going to sit here while a mutt stares me down like I'm a criminal. You might want to sit down, Mr. Bosley, the judge warned. This court is not finished. But what happened next made everyone realize the boy's silence had never been the problem. It was what his silence had been protecting. Judge Cranmore wasn't a man easily shaken. In 30 years on the bench, he'd seen everything, from gang trials to custody wars that tore families apart. But this? A boy barely speaking, a dog reacting to silent signals, and a foster father fidgeting like he had something to hide. This was different. He looked over the top of his glasses at Gerald Bosley. You're not under investigation yet, Mr. Bosley, but I'd suggest you stop talking unless spoken to. Gerald clenched his jaw and dropped back into his chair. Javon sat with his arms crossed tightly now, his fingers twitching subtly under the table. The courtroom wasn't loud, but the silence had a pressure to it, like everyone was afraid the next breath might break something important. The prosecutor stepped forward. Javon, can you show us the full sequence you used with Oscar? The boy didn't answer at first. He stared at the floor, blinked once, then looked to the judge. "Am I going to get moved again?" he asked quietly. The judge leaned forward. "Moved where?" "To another house. Somewhere worse. You're safe here, son," Cranmore replied. "Just tell the truth." Javon hesitated, then gave a small nod. He extended his right hand under the table and started tapping. 3 quick pulses with his fingers, a pause, then 2 soft brushes of his palm against his thigh. Oscar immediately stepped closer to the Bosleys. But he didn't bark. He sat. Then he lowered his head and placed his paw forward, a move trained specifically to signal discomfort or danger near a person. The handler turned pale. "That's a high-level alert. That means Oscar believes this man is a threat. It's rare. We don't teach that lightly." The courtroom broke into murmurs. Lynette Bosley whispered something into Gerald's ear, but he just shook his head, tight-lipped and red-faced. Judge Cranmore raised a hand to silence the room. Then he turned to the clerk. "Is the school counselor present today?" A woman stood at the back, mid-40s, pressed grey skirt, holding a file close to her chest. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm Denise Hadley, Liberty Middle School." "Ms. Hadley, have you noticed any behavior from Javon that might support what we're seeing here?" Denise nodded and stepped forward. "Yes. Javon rarely speaks at school, but he's observant, hyper-aware. A few weeks ago, during lunch, a tray dropped behind him and he dropped to the ground instantly. No hesitation, like a reflex. We thought it might be PTSD. Did he ever talk to anyone about what happened at home?" "No, but he did draw." "Draw?" Denise opened her file and produced 3 sheets of paper, each with a childish sketch in pencil. One showed a boy in a corner. Another had a man with angry lines for eyebrows. The third was a dog, not a cartoon. Detailed. Accurate. Wearing a vest. "That's Oscar," the handler whispered, startled. "That's my dog." The judge turned to Javon. "When did you draw these?" Javon shrugged. "Couple weeks ago. Did anyone help you with them?" "No." "Did you draw Oscar from memory?" Javon gave a single nod. "He trained at my grandpa's place." The handler blinked. "What's your grandfather's name?" "Wilbur Merrick." Her eyes widened. "I knew Wilbur. He ran a canine trauma response program in Fremont. We trained there twice a year. That man saved lives." The judge's expression changed. This boy wasn't just reacting. He had been part of something bigger before everything fell apart. And suddenly, the silence made sense. He wasn't scared to speak. He just trusted different methods, safer ones. But the most damning part wasn't the dog or the drawings. It was the fear behind Javon's calm, and the fact that no one had asked the right questions until now. The silence broke when Judge Cranmore stood up. Not just a lean or a shift, but fully stood, his robe swaying slightly as he stepped down from the bench. He didn't say anything at first, just walked slowly toward the handler, the dog, and the boy. No one stopped him, no one breathed. He crouched down beside Oscar. The dog didn't flinch, still locked in that half-guarded stance, tail flat, eyes sharp, not scared, not confused. Ready. The way trained dogs are when they're protecting something that matters. "Javon," the judge said, voice low. "Has Oscar ever reacted to Mr. Bosley before?" "I only saw him once," Javon said, barely audible. "When was that?" 3 months ago. When he came with the therapy lady to our house. That was news." The handler turned. "Oscar's never been placed with the Bosleys. That wasn't part of the program." Javon looked at her, then down at Oscar. "I heard Gerald yelling. The door was open. Oscar looked at him, then walked away and sat by the fridge. Just sat there. Wouldn't move. That's how I knew he remembered." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me Oscar was reacting to him the same way before today?" Javon nodded once. "Why didn't you say anything then?" His voice dropped lower. "Didn't think it would matter." Gerald slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. You're letting a child and a mutt destroy our name." Cranmore stood up slowly and stared directly at him. "You're one outburst away from contempt. Sit down, Mr. Bosley." Gerald backed down, but his face burned red. The handler stepped closer. Your Honor, if I may. Dogs like Oscar don't just respond to behavior. They pick up on tone, body tension, scent changes. He's reacting to something real. Could he be reacting to fear? Cranmore asked. Yes, she said. But not just general fear. Targeted fear. He knows it's coming from that direction, she pointed at Gerald, and not from anyone else in the room. The prosecutor turned to Javon. Did Gerald ever touch you? A pause. Then, softly, not where people could see, Lynette Bosley stood up, panicked. He's lying! That boy has always hated us. He's difficult, withdrawn, impossible to deal with. You're just going to take his word? No, the judge interrupted. We're going to take the word of a child who uses trained service commands to communicate because adults failed him too many times to count. He motioned to the bailiff. Escort Mrs. Bosley outside until I say otherwise. Lynette began to argue, but the bailiff moved quickly, and she stopped. With a heavy huff, she grabbed her bag and stormed out. Cranmore returned to his bench. We're taking a short recess. Bailiff, keep Mr. Bosley here. The rest may step out. But Javon didn't move. Neither did Oscar. The handler crouched beside him. You okay? The boy looked down. I think he remembers more than I do. She smiled gently. He remembers because you trained him, and because you needed him to. When the room cleared, the judge requested both the guardian and the handler to remain. He pulled up a chair in front of Javon, leaned in, and said something no one else heard. The guardian's expression shifted from neutral to stunned. She leaned toward the handler. He just told the judge he used to sleep with Oscar when his grandfather got sick. That Oscar was the only one who knew what the yelling meant. The only one who could tell if it was safe to walk into the kitchen. Yelling from who? The handler asked. Javon looked up. My uncle, Gerald. The room froze again, even with only 3 people inside. But now it wasn't just about protecting a child. It was about unraveling how someone like Gerald ever became a foster parent in the first place. It wasn't listed in any file. No caseworker flagged it. No judge, until now, had made the connection. But once Javon said it, my uncle, Gerald, it reframed everything. Gerald Bosley wasn't just some foster dad. He was family. Distant, yes, but blood. The type of connection that slips through the cracks when paperwork gets rushed and files don't talk to each other. The guardian's voice was tight. How long have you known Gerald was your uncle? Javon shrugged. Since I got there. First night. He said, your mama never gave me no respect, now I got you. The judge's eyes stayed on the boy. Did you tell anyone that? You think they'd believe me? Javon asked, dead serious. They didn't believe her when she called him out. Cranmore leaned back slowly in his chair. The handler looked from the judge to the guardian. We need to pull Oscar's training records. If Javon helped train him at his grandfather's, those sessions would be logged. It'll back up everything. The judge nodded. Do it. Today. Javon was still seated, still calm, but the energy around him had shifted. Not nervous, just relieved that someone had finally said what he wasn't allowed to. Gerald used to lock me out back, Javon said softly, more to himself than anyone. Winter, summer, didn't matter. Said boys needed to be hardened. Said crying was for girls. Did Lynette know? The guardian asked. She'd just turned the TV up louder. Said she didn't hear anything. The handler bit her lip. He was signaling Oscar with all of this. That's how he kept himself safe. The judge looked down at the file in front of him. You said your grandfather taught you how to train dogs. Was it just Oscar? No, Javon said. All kinds. PTSD dogs, therapy dogs, scent detection. How old were you when you started? 7? And you remember all the commands? Javon nodded. They're like songs in my head. Judge Cranmore paused. Can you show me one more? The boy looked over at Oscar, who was watching him closely. Javon tapped twice, rubbed his palm along his knee, then pointed under the table. Oscar responded instantly, crawling beneath and curling at the boy's feet, resting his head on Javon's shoes. "What did you just ask him to do?" the judge asked. "Guard me." A silence fell again, this time different, heavy with truth. "Javon," the guardian said gently, "do you know why Gerald never wanted you talking to people?" The boy gave the smallest nod. "Because if I did, people would ask questions." "Did you ever try?" Javon looked up for the first time. "I stopped when no one listened." Judge Cranmore tapped a pen on his pad, then looked to the handler. "How many dogs like Oscar are in the state program?" "Less than 50, she replied. "They're hard to train, and the ones trained by Wilbur, Javon's grandfather, are considered elite." He sighed. "That explains the level of discipline I'm seeing." Oscar hadn't moved once from under the table. He remained still, protective, as if he knew this moment had been waiting to surface. The judge turned toward the door. "Bailiff, bring Mr. Bosley back in." A moment later, Gerald walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Cranmore didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Bosley, were you ever present during Wilbur Merrick's training sessions?" Gerald scoffed. "Long time ago, before he cut me off." "Why did he cut you off?" "That old man had opinions. Always favored his daughter. Never thought I'd be good enough for anything." "Did you ask to foster Javon, or were you selected?" Gerald blinked. "Does it matter?" The judge folded his hands. "It does when it looks like you manipulated the system to gain access to a child you were never fit to raise. But the next decision wouldn't be made in anger. It would be made by a judge who had finally heard the truth in a language most people never bothered to learn." The air shifted again when the judge leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Bosley, based on the evidence presented, your relationship to the minor, and your past involvement with the Merrick family, I'm authorizing an emergency review of your foster certification, effective immediately." Gerald's eyes widened. "You can't just—" "I can," the judge cut in. "And I just did." Oscar growled low, not loud, but enough to quiet the room. Gerald took an instinctive step back. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked less angry and more exposed. "I suggest you don't test that dog," the handler said coldly, stepping slightly in front of Oscar. 2 officers approached Gerald from behind, one placing a hand on his shoulder. "You'll need to come with us while we file the motion, sir." Gerald didn't fight, but he didn't go quietly. "This is garbage. That boy doesn't talk for months, and now suddenly he's your golden witness?" "He doesn't need to talk," Judge Cranmore replied. He communicated more clearly than any adult in this room. The door closed behind Gerald, and for the first time, Javon's breathing changed. His shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, in release. Like he had been holding something in for months and finally realized it didn't belong to him anymore. The judge turned toward Javon again. "Son, I'm going to ask you something serious. You don't have to answer unless you want to." Javon looked up. "Do you feel safe staying with anyone who knew Gerald?" "No." "Would you prefer a temporary placement with someone familiar to your grandfather's network? Maybe someone who works with dogs?" The boy gave a single nod. Not eager, just honest. The handler turned to the judge. "I know someone. Trained under Wilbur for 6 years. No children of her own, but she's certified and licensed for trauma care. I'll call her today." Cranmore scribbled something in his notes. "Make the arrangements. I'll approve it before sunset." The guardian placed a hand lightly on Javon's shoulder. "That sound okay with you?" Javon glanced down at Oscar. The dog's tail gave a small thump on the floor. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Just outside the courtroom, a small crowd had gathered. Law clerks, legal assistants, 2 off-duty officers waiting on other cases. Word had started to spread. Not gossip, not drama. Just quiet respect for a boy who didn't say much, but said everything anyway. Inside, Judge Cranmore took a deep breath. He wasn't one for speeches, but he paused, looked around the half-empty room, and said something he hadn't written down. "I've been on this bench a long time, long enough to know the law doesn't always come with clarity. But today, this courtroom didn't need 1,000 words or a long testimony. It just needed someone to listen." The handler blinked back tears. The guardian nodded silently. The judge turned to the clerk. "Let's adjourn for today, but I want this transcript reviewed by every family court judge in Lucas County. No redactions." Oscar stood up slowly and placed his paw gently on Javon's foot one last time before turning toward the exit. Javon stood with him. No handcuffs, no yelling, no screaming scenes like on TV. Just a slow, careful walk to the hallway where something different, better, was finally waiting for him. As they exited, a younger intern, sitting near the back, whispered to the clerk beside her, "What just happened?" And the clerk, without looking away from the door, replied, "A child spoke in the only language he knew, and someone finally listened." But the real ending hadn't come yet, because the lesson this courtroom learned was just the beginning of what needed to change outside those walls. Javon didn't speak much the next few days. He didn't have to. The woman who took him in, Ramona Ellis, an ex-military canine handler from Perrysburg, knew better than to push. She gave him his own room, stocked the fridge with what little she knew kids liked, and laid out an extra bed for Oscar, who hadn't left Javon's side since they walked out of that courtroom. They didn't talk much the first night. Ramona simply handed him a folded blanket, said, "Bathroom's down the hall," and turned on the porch light before going to bed. No questions, no big speeches, just space. Real space. It wasn't a miracle fix. He still flinched at doors opening too fast, still checked behind himself twice before entering a room. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't lie awake counting the seconds until morning. And when morning did come, he got up without anyone calling him. Ramona found him out back, tossing a ball for Oscar, using those same quiet signals. A twitch of the fingers, a nod, a quick tap. Oscar moved like he already knew the day's rhythm. She brought out 2 mugs, coffee for her, hot cocoa for him. "You trained him good," she said. Javon just shrugged. "Wilbur taught me too, years ago. We ran drills in an old warehouse with busted floors and no heat. That man could turn any stray mutt into a service dog in 2 weeks flat." Javon didn't answer, but his mouth twitched a little, just slightly. Maybe the start of a smile. "You don't have to talk, Javon," she said. "But I'm here when you're ready." He paused. "Why'd you say yes?" Ramona looked up at the sky like she was choosing her words from it. "Because someone gave me a shot when I came back from Afghanistan and couldn't walk into a grocery store without shaking. You deserve that too." He let that sit for a second. Then, "People never listen." She sipped her coffee. "They're listening now." In the days that followed, more information surfaced. Old reports, discarded complaints from Gerald's former co-workers, notes that never made it to the case file. A system full of gaps, until a dog filled one. Judge Cranmore personally requested an internal review of the foster agency's vetting process. 2 caseworkers were reassigned. Lynette Bosley was questioned for neglect. Gerald? He was charged with multiple counts: child endangerment, emotional abuse, and 1 count of perjury. The story made local news. But it wasn't Javon's face on TV. It was Oscar's. A headline under the evening segment read, "Therapy Dog Helps Expose Abuse Case. Boy's Silent Signals Lead to Breakthrough." They got it wrong, of course. It wasn't just a dog. It was a child who knew a language that didn't rely on shouting. A child who had waited for someone, anyone, to take his quiet seriously. Back at Ramona's house, things weren't perfect. He still didn't say much at school, still flinched when people raised their voices. But he smiled more. 8 full meals, slept through the night, and one Friday afternoon he pulled out a worn notebook and started writing. At the top of the page he wrote, "How to Train Dogs Who Listen Without Words." Ramona saw the title but didn't say anything. She didn't have to. And when Judge Cranmore retired later that year, he kept 1 file from his entire career. Not a murder case, not a fraud scheme, but Javon's. He kept it to remind himself that justice doesn't always come from the loudest voices. Sometimes it comes from those who were quiet too long. So if there's one thing to take from Javon's story, it's this. When someone goes quiet, don't assume they have nothing to say. Maybe they're just waiting for the right kind of listener. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones we almost missed.